Welcome back. I'm Kimberly. She's Fuliana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec. We're continuing our discussion with Stephen Bowen and Dr. Terry Lyles, and this week we're looking at the book and what invaluable means in the work sense, and also the two words that they've coined for this particular book, willitude and negotiate.
Do you find that the reaction to it is more than you would have expected by the sum of the two parts? So is there synergy created by you working together, but has the result been more than you thought in terms of bringing those two parts together?
I would have to say, I think it came out better than I ever imagined, right? I was worried about how it was going to come out, but I also know when Terry and I can literally, without talking to each other, walk up on stage from two sides of the stage, having not seen each other for weeks or even a couple months, probably, okay? And we can stand up there and we will play off of each other and it will sing to the audience, right?
Yeah.
And so I always felt that would happen. But boy, I've only done one book, and it was a business-oriented book called Total Value Optimization around supply chain, which was for a completely different reason. It wasn't for selling the book. It was for establishing value around my business, right? And it worked really well. This was a completely different aspect. So for me, I think it came out even way better than I expected. And I think part of that is not only because of Terry, and I want Terry, you to comment on this, but also because we decided to include these 9 spotlights, as we call them, of 9 people. And we have many others, but these 9 people trying to cover a fairly broad brush of different experiences in life and personalities.
Yeah, and that was really the key. It was like we didn't want to just tell our stories. We wanted to highlight other people. And Steve took half of them. I took half of them. People that we knew in our networks that we believed were invaluable. And each of their stories are at the end of every chapter. And as Steve said, it's an invaluable spotlight of one person.
Yeah.
From, people that look at, like, why do you buy a Birkin bag? Why are you waiting in line? Chick-fil-A, Dr. Ginger with the physiology side of what you do. Tim Mitchell, who is a recording artist for Shakira, songwriter, guitarist, so we have a lot of different interesting people in a genre that covers like A to Z on how did you get to where you are? Because Steve and I just didn't want to tell our stories. We wanted to tell other people's stories, but involve our technology into what we believed invaluableness really is.
Absolutely. And the last thing I would just add, Kim, is this. Is it actually made me realize, other than any work I did with Terry myself, that I was actually sane. I wasn't insane. Because
that's debatable. We're all something.
One uniqueness we had, all 9 of the interviewees said the same thing to us, which we were just like, and we never told anybody about it. And it was, failure is not an option. That was the phrase. And every single, per person, all 9, somewhere in them telling us their story, which we gave a snippet of, right? They used that exact phrase. And that was eye-opening. That's what we hope to help instill into people, right? Whatever it is they do, doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that was one of the qualities of being invaluable is like, just don't quit. People who fail quit. Just don't quit because you fail. And one of our chapters is about failing forward. Just keep failing, fail forward. Just don't fail backwards. Just don't do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. Fail forward, learn. What is the learning from that perceived failure? And make yourself invaluable. And to Steve's point, that's what we thought was so incredible because none of these people know each other. All these 9 people, they don't know each other. I mean, like they're just totally disconnected. And we found this theme of invaluableness that we found throughout the book and wanted to make sure that we, broadcasted that loudly, that anybody that has a potential and a willingness can become invaluable.
It's interesting because we have had on the podcast elite athletes as guests. And they talked very much about that there was going to be days where they didn't perform as well. There was going to be times where they didn't reach the goals that they set, but it was always about personal best and setting yourself the goals that were personal goals rather than the external measures of whether you were successful or not. Those episodes, those podcasts resonated so much more than we expected them to, with people being able to relate that person's story in a totally different field to their own struggles and their own development. So, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure that the listeners are going to be appreciative of the fact that they've got those, what we might call case studies, that they love so much in the podcast that they're in the book as well. That's great. Great. So we might get on to the first question, boys.
And that's what the thing. Okay, go ahead. Yes, please. Sorry.
We're ready.
That's why with guests, I only ever send 4 questions, because I find that sometimes we get to them and sometimes we don't. You have talked about it a little bit, but the question was, what's the difference between invaluable and irreplaceable?
Terry, you want to start?
Yeah, and Steve and I talked a lot about this, because this is kind of what people start thinking, like irreplaceable. Listen, anybody can be replaced. A spouse, a coworker, a president, a senator. But how do you become that je ne sais quoi that they don't want to get rid of you? Because there's just something about you that is so invaluable. We'll put up with some of the stuff that you may have that we could replace you with, but you have some value that is irreplaceable. So it's the value. It's not the position. It's more on the value of who the person is.
I would just add, if I look at it from a personal perspective, my wife would tell you she's been trying to get rid of me for 38 years. And it's like this concept of irreplaceable versus invaluable. I am certainly not irreplaceable, okay? My wife could easily go find another husband, as we know many people do. And no, I don't have any issues with that. I'm just saying I haven't been through that. So I figure I must be finding a way to create some value in her eyes every single day. And so when I look at that, we had very much a partnership. I couldn't build a business without her being willing. She made the decision. I didn't ask for it. She made the decision. She wanted to be home with the kids. She helped with the business at the start. And, this was a partnership. And you know what? Partnerships have problems. They run into real problems. And so, as you go through this, you can use the concept of that you're sort of working yourself to becoming more difficult to replace. But I don't think anyone's ever irreplaceable. And so if I don't believe that with my own wife, then I sure shouldn't believe that in my role, whatever that was, whether the jobs I had before or the company that I built. Even in that company, I wasn't irreplaceable. I was simply had to add the value to attract great people around to want to become part of what we were building. And that's how I look at it.
So what I'm getting a sense of is that the conversation is about value, which you've said often enough.
Yes.
So how are people measuring their value? And is it the same as their worth?
Well, and see, that's the beauty of what we tried to get into the book was VAL, V-A-L, is literally the word that differentiates health, strength, and self-worth. So in VAL means I am able to have value and continue that. But VAL is a very powerful word, just as you cycle it out, because it literally means self-worth. So on the cover, I know you're not doing video, but it's health, strength, and self-worth. That's what this triangle is about.
Okay.
So we talk about mental, emotional, physical health, mental, emotional, physical strength, and how that goes up that triangle to the top as that pyramid is to create a self-worth, because some people can have a great self-worth. Others don't have a self-worth. They don't think they deserve it. They don't qualify for it. So we really wanted to focus on what is your worth? How do you pull that out of yourself to become the best you can be?
And Terry, if I might add on, if that's okay, Kim, to this, when I think about this, we always hear about, quote, the overnight success, right? And most of us realize I'm not saying they don't exist. They're just very, very far and few between. And
Right.
here's what my experience has been. Those that work for their success, that invest in themselves, working on their health, mental and physical, working on their strength from a flexibility and adaptability standpoint, and building their own self-worth into what we call develop the willitude to negotiate success, our two portmanteaus that we created going into this book. Well, when I look out at people that do have this instant success, and there are some people that have had instant success. You see it often like with childhood actors that all of a sudden in a year or two, they go from nobody to one of the most popular people in the world. What happens? They fall apart later. Why? Because they haven't actually had to work to build that health and strength aspect underneath of their own self-worth. Mm-hmm. So this is how I think of, for all of us out there, we have to think that whenever we're investing in hard work, whenever we're encountering huge challenges or hurdles that are ahead of us, that only builds our self-worth. And if we can take it on that way, then we strengthen ourselves rather than diminish ourselves.
We have a lot of listeners who are in the CEO, C-suite level that are moving towards reducing their corporate responsibilities, shall we say. Yes. And what we're finding, particularly Juliana with her work with them, is that they identify with the title that they have. They see themselves as the job, the title that they have. So if you look at them 12 months down the track after they've moved away from that title, instead of saying, I am this, they'll say, I used to be this thing. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that the self-worth part of that triangle is something that they've got to look at internally rather than in their work sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that is the psychological aspect of it, of getting to a place where I am, not what I do, but who am I, not what I do. You know, we tried to focus on I am versus I do. And they're two different things. But if I know who I am, I can do anything that I put my mind to and my willitude and negotiation skills to, which we talk about. We can become whatever, but I need to know why. Who am I? And that's invaluable. If I know my value, I can create a substructure around that to become pretty much whoever I need to be.
So are we missing an opportunity to develop that much earlier in people's lives? So are we missing the opportunity to develop it even when they're teenagers?
Hugely. I think this is a big miss for us. In fact, on Wednesday night in my little hometown of Duxbury, Massachusetts, I'm going to the Duxbury, what is their elementary or middle school, depending on where you are in the world, what people call it. So this is 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, mostly with some 9th graders in it. And they're having a career night at that age.
Yeah.
To talk about what they want to do and where they go. And they have a wonderful program. So I don't want to go down that path too far. But what I want to say is that what Terry is saying about when you go through these transitions in life, and that's what you brought up, Kim, yep. In my eyes, is a transition from being that CEO to being something else now, in quote, that we tend to use this term retirement or whatever terminology that you want to throw at it. Well, this is where I think people fail to apply. And I think this applies whether you're 60 or 70 years old and 50 years old and coming out of a corporate job, or you're 15 years old and you're trying to find your way across. So underneath of the triangle that we have on our book of health, strength, and at the top of the triangle, self-worth, is what we call the bedrock. And the bedrock is you have to have a purpose and you have to operate with values. And I think when we talk about young people, we need to talk to them more about purpose. Now, this sounds maybe a little harsh to some people when I say purpose is, why do I exist? That's a really hard question to answer. And you don't have the answer all the time right away. We use some examples in the book. You know, the person who created Kentucky Fried Chicken started at age 65. right? And then you see some of these musicians today that are in their teens, right? Or a Bill Gates who was in his late teens, early 20s. So it depends. But if we spent more time with the young folks, helping them to understand you have this bedrock of purpose and values, you have knowledge, skills, and willingness that you have to bring into this of investing in yourself in order to develop this health aspect, strength aspect, and self-worth, then we would help everyone experience even greater things in their life. That's what I do.
Yeah, I can see that that's the case. We talked across a whole range of guests of all different topics, and it all comes back to we are missing an opportunity for developing the next generation of the workforce, of contributors, of value adders, because we're leaving them in the mold that has been in place for generations.
Yeah, and it really comes down to a mindset. I mean, I have 2 adult sons and a younger son. I made my own grandchild, so Steve and I laugh. I have a 10-year-old, so I married again, and
yes,
it's a whole other book.
Is invaluable.
Marcia's got to allow me to write that book, but I have a 10-year-old and he plays tennis every day at a pretty high level. And I remember one day I said to him, "Wow, you played great tennis today." And he looked at me like almost offended. And he's like, "No, I'm a great tennis player today." And I was like, okay, you see, it's not what I did, it's who I am. Yeah. And that's what we tried to highlight in our 9, spotlight people of what is the core je ne sais quoi of yourself that really made you invaluable. And you did, listen, God gives all of us talent. We're all born with something. Some sing, some dance, some, I don't know, whatever you do. But you know what? Skill is the discipline you put around that talent to be the best, to become invaluable. So we talk about the skill set, your values, your purpose. How do you align it? How do you apply it every day? How do you put that to a strategy and an action plan? So it's really not a self-help book, I would say. I mean, I probably maybe shouldn't say that, but it's really more of an action book. Like, listen, if you want to do something, go do it.
Yep. So it's interesting you use the word discipline, because for my mind, that's the key, is that you have to be disciplined, and we are not conditioned to be disciplined unless it's something that we absolutely desperately want. Another one of my bugbears is that we'll do things in our personal lives where we'll make something happen, but we don't transfer the skills that we've used to do that into the workplace, and can't see that we've got those skills that could be applied to the workplace, or the other way around.
I agree, Kevin. It goes both ways. And I think of it like, I'm going to tie to we talked about the younger generation and what this kind of understanding could help them develop. But now let's go back to your question about the CEO who now no longer has the title. In that transition, you've got to go back to saying, what is my purpose now? What values am I going to operate with? What knowledge do I need to have to do what I want to do? What skills do I need to have to, skills are basically what you do with what you know, or how you use what you know. And then attitude, how do I want to feel about what I'm doing? And you have to revisit all of that. So if we can instill that at a younger age, fantastic. But you know what? If somebody goes through a transition and you can now pick that up and learn that, and I think that's what we hoped to get out there, is for people to realize that it's never too early, and it sure is never too late.
Yeah. And that's how Steve and I really came up with this is, Steve had gone through this transition, as we all go through transition, and he's getting ready to go through a retirement, and COVID hit, and it took an extra 2 years, and he's been retiring for like 4 years and stayed on as CEO of his company and managed, 1,000 people and just do it. And I'm like, listen, there'll be an end to this, but now what? What are you going to do then? And that's when I asked him, hey, do you want to do a book with me? And not that he needed something to do. I mean, he doesn't need anything to do. Steve is invaluable. He doesn't need anything to do. But it so intrigued him because I know him. I'm like, he's going to do this because he has too much information and wealth of knowledge and learning and expertise that this is our give back. how do we share how we train people, what you said, Kim, about discipline? How do you put the structure around your talent? I know a lot of talented people that are losers. They're only losers by choice. They just didn't put the discipline around it.
Yeah.
We want to talk about what is the discipline. Like I have to actually do something every day to make that happen. So that's why we want to do this. And we really want to focus on the transitions of life, like Steve said, from middle school to high school to college.
I want to say to that discipline, Kim, and Terry knows this, every method that's in our book, I use for myself. Read a couple of hundred self-development books I use for myself, and I espouse and work with my people on with Terry's help, right? So anything that's in that book is, I guarantee everyone out there, is something I've done, failed at a bunch of times, and then went on, and I've been very blessed in life. But those blessings come with some pain, you know? I got fired from 2 jobs. You know, I had a CEO job. I lost it, okay? So I had to really do some great reflection after that. And when I did, it changed my perspective on things. And I think that's the piece that, I don't know, Kim, how you and your partner talk about, how do you pick up pieces from, what I'll call a potential life disaster and turn it, the old lemons into lemonade and that whole thing. But that's what we're doing, right? That's what all of us are doing. We're going to have success.
Having gone through the process, I think, makes you more confident that you can do that. And it gives you, it's a thing we've talked about before. You give yourself permission to fail, but you give yourself permission to try something that you haven't tried before. And it's about that giving yourself permission that I think is lacking a lot. As people get older, they think, well, I better not do that because all of these other things that I've heard or experienced might happen. And the giving yourself permission to just try, just to do stuff, just to fail, if that's what it's going to be. But out of everything, there's learning. Everyone's a mentor and everything's a lesson.
We've covered a fair bit so far in this part of the podcast, so let's take a break. Join us for part 2, or part 3, in fact. I'm Kim Bailey, she's Fuliana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec.